She posted, "I'm ready to graduate," just 5 days before her body was found. A nursing student, a TikTok star, a daughter full of dreams gone in a moment of senseless violence. Today, we unpack how a quiet roommate dispute over cats ended with a graduation gown never worn, and a final TikTok that now feels like a goodbye. Tamilor Odense wasn't trying to be famous. She wasn't one of those influencers chasing clout or staging drama. She was just real. On TikTok, under the handle at Tamadollars, she shared what her days looked like as a nursing student in Houston long nights, with textbooks scattered across her bed, 5-minute pep talks before clinicals, and the kind of raw honesty that made you feel like you were watching your best friend. Her followers, over 30,000 of them, didn't just watch her journey. They rooted for her. Every post was a window into her hustle. Surviving 10-hour shifts at the hospital. How I memorize anatomy terms. When caffeine becomes your entire personality. She joked about being broke, about passing out in scrubs, about celebrating small wins like making it to class on 3 hours of sleep. And maybe that's what made her special. Tamilor wasn't a performer. She was a documenter. She turned the exhausting grind of nursing school into something beautiful and relatable, especially for young black women, and even more so for African immigrant daughters navigating school, culture, and identity all at once. Her last few posts were full of light. She talked about graduation being just around the corner. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a visible relief, like someone who'd made it through the hardest part of the storm. She mentioned booking a trip. She teased about moving out. She even said, "I'm finally starting to breathe again." But what no one could have known, not her followers, not even her close friends, was that danger was waiting just a few feet away, behind the same apartment walls she filmed her dreams in. April 21st, 2025. That was the last time Tamilor Odense posted to TikTok. In the video, she stood in her bedroom smiling. Her caption read, "I can finally say it, I'm about to graduate." For her followers, it felt like the final chapter in a long, exhausting journey. Nursing school had pushed her to the edge more than once, but now she was just days away from walking this stage with a degree she'd fought hard for. From that moment on, every day felt like a countdown. 7 days left, then 6, then 5. But behind the camera, something wasn't right. Her roommates had noticed tension. Friends said she'd grown quieter in texts. Still, no one expected what would happen next. Because 5 days later, on April 28th, police would find Tamilor dead in her apartment, and that joyful graduation countdown would be frozen in time. At first, everything seemed normal. Tamilor had just moved into a shared apartment on Goforth Road in southeast Houston. It was affordable, close to campus, and her new roommate seemed quiet. His name was Chester Grant, a 40-year-old man she had only recently met. They weren't close friends. This wasn't a long-time connection. It was one of those setups that happens when rent is too high and student housing isn't an option. Tamilor needed a place, and Chester needed someone to help with the bills. But something about it didn't sit right. Friends later said she didn't talk much about him. She wasn't exactly excited to move in. She kept things vague. There were no funny roommate stories, no bonding moments, just a name, just a man in the background. And sometimes, silence is the first red flag, not a scream, not a warning, just the absence of comfort, the quiet instinct that something is off, but not loud enough to leave. For Tamilor, that silence would prove fatal. Tamilor Elizabeth Odense was just 23 years old. Born in the United Kingdom to Nigerian parents, she carried more than one identity: British, Nigerian, African, student, first-generation dreamer. Her friends say she was the kind of person who made others feel safe. She listened more than she spoke. She worked harder than she ever let on. In 2022, she moved to Houston to pursue a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. It wasn't easy. Between clinicals, part-time work, and life in a new country, the pressure never let up. But she kept going. She kept studying. And she kept posting not for attention, but to keep herself grounded, to remind herself and maybe others that there was a finish line. She loved kids. Pediatrics was her goal. She had already started looking into job opportunities, talking about moving closer to a hospital. She had even begun to save for her own place, one where she could live alone, safe, peaceful. But she never made it there. The apartment was on Goforth Road in the southeast corner of Houston, not far from campus, quiet, the kind of place where neighbors nod but don't ask questions. Tamlor had only been living there for a short time, maybe a month, maybe less. Her lease was temporary just until graduation. The plan was simple: finish school, walk the stage, and move out. Her roommate, Chester Grant, was almost twice her age. He was quiet, rarely seen outside, and mostly kept to himself. From the outside, it looked like a simple arrangement, two people splitting rent, sharing space, getting by. But behind closed doors, things weren't that simple. There were no close friendships between them, no signs of warmth, no family pictures, no shared meals. Just two people coexisting under one roof and, unknown to Tamilor, living on completely different wavelengths. In hindsight, people always ask why. Why didn't anyone notice? Why didn't she move sooner? But the truth is, danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it just looks like silence. And in that apartment, silence was growing heavier by the day. Chester Grant was 40 years old. Not much is publicly known about his past. No long social media trails, no close friends coming forward. According to court documents, he worked in it and had been living in Houston for some time. He was described by neighbors as quiet, distant, someone who didn't draw attention to himself. He shared the apartment with Tamilor for only a few weeks. It wasn't a friendship. It was a convenience, two people trying to make rent in a city that's gotten too expensive for most young students. But Grant's behavior had started to change. Reports say there were arguments, small ones at first, mostly about the cats they both cared for, whispers of tension, long silences, mood swings. Tamilor didn't talk about it much. Maybe she thought she could ride it out until graduation. Maybe she didn't want to make things worse. Maybe she never felt safe enough to say what was really happening. But underneath it all, something was unraveling. And Chester Grant, the quiet roommate in the background, was about to become the center of a crime no one saw coming. The breaking point, according to investigators, came down to the cats. Tamilor and Chester shared the apartment, and they shared the responsibility of caring for a few cats. At first, it seemed manageable, but over time, tension grew. There were arguments over who was feeding them, who was cleaning up after them, and where they should be allowed in the apartment. Friends later told police that Tamilor had mentioned being stressed about the situation. She said her roommate was becoming unpredictable, that he was overly possessive of the cats and would sometimes lash out when things didn't go his way. One friend said she brushed it off, thinking it was just part of the usual roommate drama. No one expected it to escalate into something dangerous. But inside that apartment, the arguments got louder, more personal, more intense. What began as small disagreements over pets turned into a pattern of growing hostility, and for reasons we may never fully understand, that conflict over the cats became the fuse for something much darker. It was Monday, April 28th, 2025. Sometime in the early afternoon, the apartment grew quiet. Too quiet. A friend of Tamilor's had been trying to reach her texts, calls, no reply. She hadn't missed class, but she hadn't responded to anyone all day. Around 3:40 in the afternoon, concerned by the silence, someone requested a welfare check. Houston police arrived at the Goforth Road apartment not long after. They knocked. No answer. They called out. Still nothing. Then they forced their way in. What they found inside would stop them cold. Tamilor was lying on the kitchen floor. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her body was still. Just a few feet away, her roommate Chester Grant was on the floor as well, alive but bleeding from what appeared to be self-inflicted wounds. The cats were there too, silent, scared, watching. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. One life had already been lost. Another was clinging on. And just like that, the quiet tension in that apartment had exploded into something irreversible. The scene inside the apartment was disturbing, even for seasoned officers. Tamilor was found in the kitchen with multiple stab wounds. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of a robbery. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place except for the violence itself. Her roommate, Chester Grant, was found nearby with injuries to his neck and wrists. Investigators say those wounds were self-inflicted. He was conscious when first responders arrived and was taken into custody after receiving emergency medical treatment. Detectives quickly ruled out the possibility of an intruder. There were no third parties, no outside suspects. It all happened between two people sharing one space. The motive, they said, appeared to be personal, rooted in conflict that had been building for weeks. What began as a disagreement over pets had somehow escalated into an act of fatal violence. The evidence told a clear story. There had been no struggle from the outside. This was internal, intimate. A breakdown between housemates that ended in a tragedy no one had imagined. The 911 call came from a friend who hadn't heard from Tamilor all day. She told the dispatcher something felt wrong, that it wasn't like her to go silent, especially this close to graduation. The dispatcher stayed calm, collected the address, and sent officers to the scene. What they found confirmed the caller's worst fears. Police later released a brief summary of the call. No screaming, no chaos, just a voice filled with worry. The kind of concern that comes from knowing someone too well, knowing when something's off, even before the facts come in. In this case, that instinct was right. By the time the officers arrived and forced the door open, it was already too late. The silence inside had become an answer. And for the people who loved her classmates, friends, family across 2 continents, that 911 call would mark the start of a nightmare. Chester Grant survived. After officers entered the apartment and secured the scene, paramedics treated him for several self-inflicted wounds to his neck and arms. He was transported to a nearby hospital under police watch, stabilized, and kept under medical supervision for nearly 48 hours. As soon as doctors cleared him for discharge, homicide detectives stepped in. On April 30th, just 2 days after Tamilor's death, Chester Grant was officially charged with murder. The charge came swiftly based on what police described as overwhelming evidence from the scene. No plea was entered at that time. Grant was booked into the Harris County Jail, and his bond was set at $500,000. As of now, he remains in custody, awaiting his next court date. There is still no official statement from him, no confession, no explanation, just silence, the same silence that had surrounded that apartment in the days leading up to the attack. The charging documents filed in Harris County lay out the case in stark detail. They described the scene as officers found it Tamilor unresponsive on the kitchen floor, multiple wounds, no signs of forced entry. Chester Grant found nearby, injured but alive. According to the report, there were no indications of anyone else being involved. The complaint lists 1 count of murder. It states that the offense was committed intentionally and knowingly, legal language used when prosecutors believe the act wasn't random but deliberate. Grant's bond was set at $500,000, reflecting both the seriousness of the charge and the perceived risk of flight. His first court appearance was scheduled within days of the arrest. As of now, no trial date has been confirmed, and Grant has not made any public statements. The case is still active. Investigators are reviewing phone records, text messages, and any history of previous disputes between the two. But even at this early stage, prosecutors appear confident in the evidence. This isn't a whodunit. It's a question of why and whether the full truth will ever come out in court. In the days after her death, Tamalor's TikTok page became a memorial. People flooded the comments not just with shock or sympathy, but with disbelief. Her final video, the one where she smiled and said she was about to graduate, suddenly took on a new meaning. What once felt like a celebration now sounded like a goodbye. Some wrote messages to her directly. Others shared stories of how her study tips helped them pass exams or push through hard weeks. She had no idea how many people she had quietly inspired. As for Chester Grant, his digital trail is thin. No recent posts, no traceable outbursts. If there were warning signs, they weren't public. His online silence offers no answers, only more questions. And that contrast is haunting. One person lit up the internet with joy and hope. The other left behind an empty profile and a shattered reality. Sometimes the loudest truths are found in what's missing. Tamalor was just days away from walking the stage. Her cap and gown were ready. She had already taken senior photos, smiling, confident, holding a sign that read, BSN Class of 2025. It was supposed to be her moment. The proof that everything she'd fought through, the sleepless nights, the exams, the homesickness, had all been worth it. Her family had plans to fly in. Friends were preparing gifts. Some had even joked about throwing a party after the ceremony. It was more than a milestone. It was a victory. But that celebration never happened. Instead of a stage, her name was read aloud at a vigil. Instead of flowers, there were candles lined up outside her apartment. Instead of applause, there was silence. She didn't get to wear her gown. She didn't get to hear her name called. And the people who loved her will carry that heartbreak for the rest of their lives. What should have been the happiest week of her life became the one no one can forget for all the wrong reasons. Tamlor's death didn't just shake her friends and classmates. It echoed across continents. In the United Kingdom, where she was born, tributes poured in from former classmates and family friends. In Nigeria, her extended family held prayer gatherings and shared memories online. And in Houston, the nursing community, especially other first-generation African students, came together to mourn a life that represented so much hope. Her GoFundMe campaign, created to help return her body to her family overseas, raised over $47,000 in just a few days. The comments were filled with heartbreak, not only from people who knew her, but from total strangers who had followed her journey online. Young women in particular wrote about how much they saw themselves in her, the pressure, the ambition, the quiet strength. It wasn't just the loss of one person. It was the loss of what she stood for, the dream of building something slowly and honestly in a world that doesn't always make it easy. Tamlor's story became a mirror for an entire community, a reminder of how vulnerable we are, even when we're doing everything right. What happened to Tamalor wasn't just rare, it was part of a larger, often overlooked pattern. According to data from the FBI and National Safety Studies, nearly 1 in 10 homicides in the United States involves people who live together. That includes romantic partners, family members, and yes, roommates. It's not the kind of violence that makes headlines often, but it happens more than most people realize. In roommate situations, the warning signs aren't always obvious. There's no playbook for emotional instability. No universal checklist that tells you when to leave. But the risk is real, especially when people are forced to live with strangers out of financial pressure, school obligations, or housing shortages. In Tamilor's case, she didn't have much choice. Rent was expensive, graduation was close, she was just trying to get through it. But her story is a reminder. Sharing a roof with someone means more than splitting bills. It means navigating trust, safety, and sometimes danger hiding in plain sight. If there's one thing we can take from Tamlor's story, it's that roommate safety isn't just about convenience, it's about survival. So here are three things every person should do before moving in with someone, especially a stranger. 1. Run a background check. Don't just rely on vibes. Look up public court records in your city or county. Evictions, restraining orders, assault charges, these things are often public and searchable online for free. 2. Have a clear written agreement about boundaries. That includes pets, chores, visitors, and finances. It doesn't have to be legalese, but it needs to exist. Misunderstandings over small things like animals or shared items are often where tensions begin. 3. Share your living situation with people you trust. Let someone know who your roommate is, where you live, what your emergency plan is if something ever feels off. Silence makes it easier for danger to grow unnoticed. Tamilor should have been safe. Her story is not her fault. But if her life can teach others how to protect their own, then her legacy becomes more than tragedy, it becomes prevention. Even now, with a suspect in custody and charges filed, so much remains unclear. Why did Chester Grant snap? Was it really just about the cats? Were there deeper issues that no one saw? And what was going through Tamilor's mind in those final days? Did she sense the danger growing? Was she trying to hold on until graduation? We may never know. There's been no confession, no statement, no explanation from the man accused of taking her life. Investigators are still reviewing evidence texts, call logs, messages between them. Her friends and family are still waiting for answers that may never come. And that's the hardest part of stories like this. Sometimes justice moves forward, but closure never arrives. The facts can be laid out in a courtroom, but the pain stays messy, unresolved, and silent. Tamilor deserved a future, a degree, a life beyond school. And now, all that's left are questions and a community determined not to forget her. If you've ever shared a home with someone you didn't really know, then you understand how thin the line between comfort and fear can be. Tamilor did everything right. She worked hard. She stayed focused. She made plans. And yet, even with all that, it wasn't enough to protect her from what happened behind a closed door. So before you click away, take a moment. Think about the people you live with, the people you trust, and ask yourself, would you know if something wasn't safe? If you've ever had a bad roommate experience or spotted a red flag too late, share it in the comments. Your story might help someone else avoid the same mistake. And if you're new here, this channel is dedicated to real stories like this, not just the crime, but the human cost behind it. Subscribe to stay informed, stay safe, and stay aware. Tamilor's voice was quiet, but it carried. Let's make sure it never fades.